Welcome to this special bonus edition of the Bible Mastery Podcast, sponsored by Teleios and hosted by co-founder Bill Stewart. In this episode, we step outside our usual verse-by-verse format to share deeper reflections, additional insights, and meaningful conversations that extend beyond the main teaching. This bonus content is designed to enrich your understanding of Scripture. We're glad you're here.
Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our supplemental content for the Bible Mastery podcast. I hope you're enjoying the material as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you. It's a great book of Ephesians, and there's just so much to explore. Today, I just want to talk briefly about Paul's model prayer. I think we either have or will have covered this, depending on when this episode is released. But at the end of chapter 1, Paul gives a model prayer praying for the Ephesians on the assumption or the basis that they're a Christian. And it's useful because it tells us how to pray for other people, other Christians. People will come to us with very specific prayer requests, for which, of course, we want to pray. But I think this model prayer tells us no matter what the situation for which we're praying, the specific situation, God also wants us to gain the attributes that are listed in the model prayer. So in this model prayer, we see that there's thanks. This is in Ephesians 1, starting in verse 16. Knowledge of God, hope, and His power. Okay, so at any situation, somebody needs a job, somebody is deciding whether to marry somebody else, we would pray for that event or decision, but we'd also pray that they would gain knowledge of God through it and greater hope for their salvation and know God's power in working through that situation. So that's great, but there's also other model prayers. Paul has 4 prayers for the Christians to whom he's writing in his epistles. The second one, conveniently, is at the end of Ephesians 3. So in Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 3. Here, he's praying that the inner man might be strengthened, which I think is different than in the prayer in chapter 1, which is knowing God's power in our life, but also that our inner man would be strengthened in our resolve to faith or serving Him, and that we would know His love as well, and that we might be filled with the fullness of God. Otherwise, the maturity, when we think of fullness in Scripture, the Greek word also meant in abstract terms completeness or maturity. So we'd be mature in God. Then there's another interesting passage in Colossians 1, verses 9 to 11, where he's praying specifically that the Colossians, again, would have knowledge and would bear fruit in their Christian walk so they would know God even better in verse 10. So it's telling us that to live as a Christian, you first have to have knowledge, but then you have to go and practice, that you might know God better. It's like maybe if you were in college and you took a chemistry course and had a lab. Okay, so you just didn't study reactions on paper. You had to go do them. So you would have a better knowledge and experience with these chemical experiments. And it's the same when I was learning medicine. I had to study first in books, but then they put me out on the wards, which was probably pretty scary for the patients. And I had to actually practice to help me gain experience, help me ask questions, to know that the disease is better so I could be more confident in treating people, so know God better. And then again, he prays for their power and their joy and patience and persistence in living the Christian life. Plus, again, giving thanks. Now, one last short prayer is in Philippians 1, 6-8. He prays that their love, their agape love, that giving love would be more and more out of knowledge. So again, knowledge, but demonstrating love. And that he prayed they would approve all things, test all things of God, like in Romans 12, verse 1, to prove it that it's true. And that they would live without offense till the day that they die, and they would have fruits of righteousness, which come from Christ, the fruits of Christ. Something that helps us with as the head of the church. So that's a lot, putting it all together, but also tells us what we should be striving for in our own Christian life and how to pray for ourselves and others. So we've talked about thankfulness, we've talked about knowledge, using that knowledge in our Christian life so we could know God better, gain knowledge, hope our hope of salvation, which is so important, power in living the Christian life, and power in the inner man to have joy and patience and persistence in the Christian life, maturity, loving others based on his word, bearing fruit for Christ, and testing all things. I'm probably sure I missed one. So again, these model prayers are good for any situation, for ourselves and others. They're at the end of Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 3, Colossians 1, 9-12, and of Philippians 1, verses 6-8. Thanks for joining me, and I hope these extra content Patreon episodes are of help. I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bible Mastery Podcast. Join us next week for another exciting episode.
Disclaimer: this podcast is intended for listeners 18 and older and provided as information and for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained as pastors or counselors and do not hold seminary degrees but are self-trained in theology. Some topics discussed may be sensitive, thought-provoking, or challenging. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you're navigating personal or spiritual matters. No podcast content should be considered as advice or recommendations for any personal or institutional situation, professional or spiritual-based decision-making, medical, legal, financial, or safety-critical applications, commercial purposes, replacing formal education or accredited training programs. The views expressed are those of the speakers and are not necessarily shared or endorsed by Teleios. The podcast is subject to change at any time without notice. Although the podcasters endeavor to ensure current and accurate content, it may contain errors and is not presented as current, accurate, complete, or appropriate for your specific requirements. The podcasters do not accept any liability for the podcast or any other information, or the use of such information, provided.